Mythology and technology. Deep in the dense growth of a commercial forest there is a very old tree, half dead but still growing. Its trunk is about 2 meters across at the base. It has stood for at least 150 years, as it is marked on the maps of the 19th century hunting lodge. It must have been big even then, because someone nailed a horseshoe into it. When the contemporary forestry was planted 30-odd years ago, and the other old trees removed, this one was left alone. The horseshoe is upturned, leaking out all of its good luck. The tree with the horseshoe grows on the shores of the so-called Blessington Lakes, also more accurately known as the Puka Reservoir. Puka comes from the Irish pul a Puca, meaning the Puca's hole. It holds 166 billion litres of water. Just over 100 years ago, there was no water there at all. 5,500 acres or 22 square kilometres of land that is now submerged underwater. It is clearly visible from the window of an aeroplane. In the 1930s, the two rivers of Kings River and the River Liffey were dammed, and the valley flooded to create a new hydroelectric power station. The station, still in operation today, represented a major engineering project in the young Irish Free State. Obstructions to the water flow and to possible future boats were cleared, including trees, houses, walls, roads, bridges. The human residents of the valley were evicted prior to the flooding and given compensation that the state calculated as more than reasonable. Yet displacement causes more than monetary suffering, and any uprooting of lives can have long-term emotional and social consequences. The newly formed Irish Free State Army fired artillery at the bridges that would soon be submerged. They destroyed them in an act of uncanny violence that can only be explained by a fear that some mythological or otherworldly monster might make a home for itself in the nooks and dark recesses of these old structures. The destruction of the bridges was a way of laying flat, of erasing one form of control over the landscape while introducing another. Gone were those hand-laid stones, a relic of the empire, exploded back to earth to form the lake bed. The term uprooting brings us around to trees. The trees were perhaps the only things that were not uprooted. They were instead cut down and left with only roots. Simone Weil wrote her magnum opus The Need for Roots in 1940 after being asked to explain the meek surrender of the French nation to Germany at the beginning of World War II. She drew in the metaphor of roots and considered how uprooting people en masse can have dangerous and long-lasting repercussions, especially where removal is forced. Exiled in England, she also wrote on the nation-state as a relatively new idea, while just across the Irish Sea, the reservoir was gradually filling with water as part of a new state project. We need roots, Weil argues, for social and natural connectivity. At the time that Weil wrote, in the 1940s, Western scientists had long been convinced of two major ideas, both premised on moral philosophies and both without evidence. The first was that human beings were at the centre of what we understand the world to be. The second was that species are always in competition with one another, an idea that gained traction after the discoveries of people like Darwin and Humboldt, but that cannot really be attributed to them. The idea of a place always in competition is a convenient myth for people who want to hold power. Weil would not have known the discoveries that would be made in the late 20th century about just how connected species are to one another. Western scientists began to prove what many in non-Western cultures had argued for generations, that species are interconnected in unexpected ways. The trees that live also harbour a multitude of other life, from birds, animals, plants and insects above ground to the fascinating mycorrhizal networks below. In 1997, Professor Suzanne Simard proved that trees in forests also send messages through this mycorrhizal network, passing warnings and aid through an entanglement of root and fungal hyphae, although the veracity and evidence of this new research is still regularly challenged by others in the field. The interconnectivity of soil and people was one of the main reasons humans resisted being moved on in the valleys in West Wicklow. Historian Christian Corlett compiled oral interviews of those who were relocated in his large volume work Beneath the Puka Reservoir. In this book, he documented the positive and negative responses from those relocated. Told that they would be rehoused in better places, with better land, some argued that the quality of the land was not as important as how it had been worked. The attachment to place was more than just sentiment. It was through the living, breathing forms of the land all around. The livestock also travelled, willingly or unwillingly, with some others hitching a ride along the way. The ticks, the worms, the beetles. They too experienced this loss of place and must have approached the unexpected abandonment of their home with some trepidation. Which brings us to the reverse. Manchán Magan recently wrote about the two worlds that are embedded in Irish mythology. Our world, the Ciantar, has a mirror beneath it, the altar. Each exists simultaneously, and the thin border between these places opens at key times of year, such as Samhain. It is important at these times to make sure the folk from the other place don't know that you are human, so you wear disguises or make offerings to appease them. Of all the creatures in that other place, the Puka was a little different. He could always travel freely between both worlds, making mischief in either. Local lore tells that the Puka, a trickster character in Irish mythology, lives in the form of a metre-long pike in the King's River, one of those that was flooded. The Puka is mischievous, occasionally malicious, and on a rare occasion helpful to travellers. As a shape-shifting character of the other realm, Puka has little material interest in the day-to-day lives of humans. Today, the Puka as Pike's area of roaming is the much larger expanse of Blessington Lakes. We have no way of predicting what this free reign might cause, or might have caused. The Puka was always the creature that could wander to and fro between worlds, but in the flooding so much space opened up that suddenly he could go almost anywhere. The flooded valley was filled with space to commit mischief. Flooded houses and farms unlocked untold secrets, and this creature thrived on the new surroundings, exploring each crevice. But then some things are hidden or want to remain unseen. There were graves of humans unconsecrated or unwelcome on holy ground. These were buried outside the cemetery walls. Their bones were unearthed by the erosion caused by the lapping of the shores. What was hidden became unhidden, mixed up in belief, body, history, and earth. The tree roots were gradually exposed over time, creating unusual shapes that sometimes break free and roam the waters. Seabirds came to make a home in this unusual place. The two worlds were confused, and the Puka, maybe, became bored. Which brings us to the real trouble. In many magical tales, some form of static or electricity is a portal point through which creatures can travel. Perhaps Puka can go further, into the interconnected electricity grid, into each home. In this contemporary age of technology, something wicked lies beneath the facade of shining screens and smart devices. The philosopher Bernard Stiegler, extending Heidegger's ideas, highlighted how we build technologies and then they shape our behaviours. The behaviour change then leads to other technologies. Eventually, you go so far that it is difficult to remember where it started. In late 2021, Timnit Gebru, a researcher at Google, released a report showing how bias towards white men was prevalent in the programming that underlies Google's code. Google, like many technology companies, push the myth that technologies are neutral. Gebru lost her job soon afterward. Google are not alone. Most big technology companies are led by technologies that are built on bias and histories that are problematic and often violent. Some of the internet's core technology was taken from Nazi Germany following World War II, invented at the same time that the Puka reservoir was being flooded. Philosopher Hannah Arendt saw a problem here, noting that to use these technologies would be to allow them to permeate our society. There is no telling what that can do psychologically or socially. To paraphrase another philosopher, Donna Haraway, it matters what thoughts think thoughts. It matters what technologies we use and where they come from. It matters what is beneath the reservoir and what else is created above it. So we've unlocked three meanings of the same word: power. Electrical power, generated at a newly built hydroelectric station. Political and social power, particularly that problematic form of power that creates tension or violence. Magical power, of a mythological creature that can traverse electricity wires. In her book This Changes Everything, journalist Naomi Klein wrote of a myth on a Pacific island that forbade the people living there to dig up the black stone, as it would bring untold hardship. Many years later, under pressure from Western powers, the islanders relented and mined the coal. Soon the place was near uninhabitable. The story may be apocryphal, but everything we understand is predicated on some form of story, philosophy, or myth. Whether that is the myth of neutral technology or the story of the Puka in the river, our worlds are constructed by what we can believe and what we choose to. People believed so much in the Puka reservoir that it came to exist. At that time, the hydroelectric dam was one of 2 power generating stations in Ireland, capable of powering all of Dublin City. Now it provides only around 1% of Ireland's grid. This blending of the mythology and technology is sometimes referred to in contemporary terms as more than human. The idea that we are part of an interconnected whole of living and non-living things is one world we may choose to believe in. It is one that I choose to believe in, but part of believing that is also believing that there are an infinite number of other acceptable worlds that exist simultaneously. Myth may have a role in exploring complex stories and ideas. I am not arguing that people should have stayed in the valley. They lived hard lives. Nor am I suggesting that the Puka is really in our machines, although I can't be sure. But I am asking that we consider the power of myth as part of the worlds we build and the narratives we create. My name is Shane Finan. I was the project organiser and one of the artists on Puka in the Machine. In 2022, we presented artworks that explored some of these ideas.